I don't know when the last time I wore my hair like this was. It's very like 2014 of me. Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Courtney and today is going to be a monthly wrap up. I'm doing it a little bit early because I have a busy weekend going into next week. So yeah, I'll probably end up reading a couple more manga at least by the end of the month, but we can discuss that in May. So the big thing that was happening in April, besides the reading vlogs that I was working on, was that there was the Magical Readathon. If you don't know, the Magical Readathon is a D&D style readathon. Create a character, you live in this cool magical world with a magical school. Really fun, highly recommend. And I will leave a link to the creator of the readathon in my description if you're at all interested in that and want to check it out. And then of course the other thing I was working on was finishing out my reading stats video, as well as reading and completing all of my reads for my spring reading video. Hey look, it didn't take me a month and a half to actually film and read and put out that video, so I'm really proud of myself for that one. So quickly, let's just go over what I read for each readathon prompt and then we can get into the books. So for one of my reading prompts, I had to read a book between 389 pages and 415, and for that prompt I ended up reading Braiding Sweetgrass. I thought it would end up being Delilah Green, but I was again reading this for my spring reading vlog, and so it just kind of worked out that way. And then the other two prompts I had was to read a book from my highest shelf, which happened to be Kamisama Kiss Volume 2. I don't have a TBR shelf, I have a TBR stack, so I just picked tallest book on that stack, which happened to be Kamisama Kiss. And then the other challenge was to read a book with a snack. Again, I just ate some watermelon while reading Kamisama Kiss Volume 3. And then the other thing that was included as an extra bonus thing that you could participate in was the quest, or the side quest thing. I haven't technically like completed it all the way through yet, I'm still working on it, but I don't think you actually have to complete it in the readathon time. But anyway, the side quest is, it's basically like a choose your own adventure. You're given all these different like options and you go through the different prompts. You're like trying to solve like this little mystery. It's really cute, and I like how there's like dead ends and you get to go back, so sometimes one person might be reading more than the other because they're hitting more dead ends. So I think I'm in like the last stages. For the side quests, I had to read a book with night in the title or on the cover. I did Half a Soul. There is a crescent moon and some stars. That's the closest thing I could find on my shelf. And then I had to read a book while listening to the ambiance room, which are these really cool ambiance rooms that she has made for the readathon. I wanted to read something really witchy while I did that, so I reread Witch Hat Atelier because I'm now collecting these. Then I had to read a book from my lowest shelf. Again, I have stacks, so again I just picked the book that was at the bottom of my stacks, which happened to be Lore Olympus. Then I had to read a book that I didn't know much about, which I picked up Emily Wilde's Encycloaedia of Faeries. I didn't really know much going into this. Then I had to read a suggested book, a book suggested for me, and I ended up picking Pilu of the Woods. The reason I got the suggestion is because I was filming my spring reading vlog, like I said, and that whole video is made up of booktuber suggestions and recommendations. Basically, I was taking anything that I was reading for my spring reading vlog video and trying to apply it to any of the prompts that I could, so that's what happened. The next prompt was to reread an old favorite. This one was funny. You know, I'm working on these side quest prompts and you're not supposed to read ahead, so I hadn't been. Literally the day before, I was just in some type of mood and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna reread the Foxhole Court. I tend to reread this at least once a year towards summer, and I don't really talk about it because it's the Foxhole Court and it's trash. I don't like to talk about this series. I don't like to recommend it. There's just so much wrong with this series, so much incredibly wrong. But yeah, I just happened to be rereading it, and then I read the next prompt in my prompt thing and it said reread an old fave, and I was like, are you kidding me? That is hilarious, because I don't reread a lot. There's only a couple books that I reread on occasion once a year. The Foxhole Court happens to be one of them at this moment, and I happen to be in the phase of rereading it. The next prompt I had was to read something plants on it. I was reading the Kamisama Kiss series. This has little flowers in it, decorative flowers, so that fits that prompt. And then the next prompts I have going forward are, or the one I'm working on, is to read something with AZ in the author or the title. I think it's actually the author. So I'm going to be reading Kamisama Kiss Volume 5 today to complete that prompt, as her name is Juliet Suzuki. And then if I need to go on to another prompt, I will go into the reading a book with furniture on the cover, which I will count Witch Hat Atelier to that because I haven't included it so far. And yeah, there's a couple other prompts on there. I'm hoping I hit the right one to get me to move forward. But yeah, I'm still working on the side quest stuff. Now that I've made a complete mess, let us discuss all of the books. So, for manga, we have Hat Atelier. I read Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. This is what I was reading for using my book stats to recommend books to me. I ended up reading the first volume for that, and I ended up reading the second and third volume at that time as well, and I was just hooked instantly and knew I had to buy and collect this series. The artwork is gorgeous, the story is wonderful. This is a seinen manga, which means it's aimed technically at adults, specifically technically adult men, but I think it's a pretty unisex series. And this series is set in a magical world where witches are born, not made. Our young character Coco discovers the secret of witchcraft, which she's definitely not supposed to. And from there, she is on a journey to save her mom, encountering a lot of magical things along the way. Again, the series is beautifully illustrated. I just love the questions this series puts forward. The seinen-ness gives it that little touch of darkness, which I really appreciate. It feels so familiar to so many shoujo magical girl type shows that I watched when I was a kid, but it's like the adult version of those, which again, I just really appreciate. It's really well done. I'm just really looking forward to binging this series. But I am trying to stay focused on series that I have already been reading. So for instance, I picked up the next volume of Kamisama Kiss. This actually comes out in May, but my bookstore got it early, so I bought it. It is a contemporary shoujo series about a young girl who decides to get revenge by being an actress. It's a whole thing. I think this series is funny as hell. And yeah, I'm on volume 48, so you know, that shows my dedication, I guess. The next volume I read was Yona of the Dawn, volume 38. This is the last volume to come out, and we're gonna have to wait a little bit for volume 39, I believe, but I am looking forward to it because I love this series. Yona of the Dawn, it's shoujo, fantasy, epic military adventure. It's basically a political intrigue story at this point, and I love it. It's great. And then, of course, the next stuff I was reading was Kamisama Kiss. In December of last year, I decided to splurge and buy the entire set just because it had been so heavily back ordered and so difficult to get. And so now I'm starting my reread. I read volume 2, volume 3, and volume 4. This is a contemporary shoujo with paranormal fantasy elements. This young girl becomes a kamisama to this temple, and from there she is dealing with a bunch of yokai and spirits and gods and stuff like that. I like Kamisama Kiss. I have very fond memories of it, but I feel like the beginning of the anime starts off very happy, fun, maybe even like a little bit shallow, and I'm waiting for it to get into the darker elements that I remember reading. But like, I like Kamisama Kiss. I don't know if it's holding up to my memories of it, which is really sad, but I think I just need to get farther into the series. But it is a 4-star series. I still think it's really good. And then the next book I read was Lore Olympus Volume 3. This is a fantasy story centered on the Greek gods, kind of reimagined. Lore Olympus is like contemporary society where the real world is set in like ancient Greece, and it's basically a Persephone Hades retelling. I like this series. I feel like the first time I read it was definitely like where it was hitting really hard. I feel like this series is really binge worthy and honestly works really, really well as a webtoon when you're just like scrolling. I personally really like the art style, and I just like her use of shapes and colors, and I like this, but again, I feel like upon reread, is it as good as my memory remembers? Maybe not. I'm still enjoying it, and I do want to like read the whole series and like know the whole story. That was a 4 out of 5 read for me. Still good. Glad I read it, all that. So next, let us get into the books that I read for my spring reading vlog. So I have 4 books that I ended up completing for that reading vlog. I have Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a non-fiction about the environment, about foraging, about indigenous knowledge, about plants, and I don't think I need to get too much into any of these books because again, I have like an almost hour-long reading vlog discussing them. This ended up being probably one of my favorite reads from that reading vlog. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I have is The Inheritance of Orquidea Divina, which is an adult fantasy set in our world, magical realism, paranormal kind of, I guess. I gave it a like 3.25 out of 5 stars. It was good, but not my new favorite. Again, I have more of my thoughts and opinions on that in my reading vlog. I also read Pilu of the Woods, which is like a 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5 stars. Really cute, but really short middle grade graphic novel. Very woodsy, and of course a great read for spring. And then the last book I ended up reading for that reading vlog was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is a Regency fantasy romance. So there's fae, there's curses, there's magical elements. It feels Howl Moving Castle, Ella Enchanted adjacent, but like the adult version of those things, the more like romance heavy version of those things. And I ended up really liking this. It was really good. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Again, I have more of my thoughts and opinions on it in my reading vlog, but yeah, it ended up being one of my favorites for the month. And then the last book that I ended up reading, which started off as a book for my spring reading vlog, was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. I gave this like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So this started out, like I said, as a book for my spring reading vlog, and I quickly figured out that the setting of this book takes place near the Arctic Circle in an island like off of Norway. It takes place in the winter time because our main character is looking into the winter fae. Our main character, Emily, is basically like a anthropology scientist, but for fairies and like the other creatures of this world. And so this book is really centered on stories of like winter and winter fairies, so it just didn't make sense to continue reading this for a spring reading vlog. I would say this book is in the realm of like cozy fantasy. It's a smaller scale story because we're really just focusing in on our main character. She's not trying to save the world or anything like that. It's just her on this journey and encountering these fairies and having to deal with them and, you know, getting trapped in their curses and different things like that, and discovering the stories and how the fairy community works around this very isolated small community of humans. And so Emily Wilde, the whole story is basically told through her journal entries. She's just making an account of her journey that will later be kind of fluffed up and depersonalized and put into her big project, which she's working on, a encyclopedia of different fairies around Europe. So she's making this journey to the small isolated community alone, and then eventually her partner in crime, I guess, shows up. His name is Wendell Brambleby, I think that's how you say his last name, and he's basically the antithesis to all she does. They are begrudgingly colleagues at their college together. He is in the same field as her, always getting on her nerves, and so when he shows up, it's like a big kerfuffle. Wendell is very much a Howl type character, very dramatic, very into his looks. And Emily also suspects him of possibly being a fairy because he's just a little bit too good to be true. And our main character, Emily, is very no nonsense, very tight laces, very much doesn't know how to interact with people, just like very awkward. So like a great relationship dynamic between these two characters who like are begrudgingly friends, don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything. And that is what I really liked. I liked their dynamic. I liked Emily going through this world of fairies and discovering stuff, but for me, I did not love the way that this story was told. Like I said, it is basically told through journal entries, and for me, that didn't really work. We have two very eccentric main characters, and Emily can be a little bit frustrating at times, and I think it's purposeful. She's supposed to be very standoffish. She's supposed to be just very awkward and clumsy. But because this story is being told from her perspective, she has to have like a little bit of awareness because she's like writing it down. That kind of takes away from the funness of her character. Because if she's like aware that she's being rude, it's not as like great to read about, you know? Because it seems more like she's like being purposely rude. And like I get it. I am sometimes like can't help myself from being that way, very standoffish too, but it just didn't work when you're very close to like an inner monologue, especially when Emily doesn't seem to be like reflecting on any of the things that she's doing and kind of saying like, I have to be this way. Maybe someone else could have written it in a direct first person and it could have ended up better, but for me, it felt like this story, what it should have done is had the beginning of a chapter be part of a journal entry and then go into third person. Again, both of these main characters are very obnoxious, very much abrasive, very much just big personality characters. And if we were at third person with them, if we had that narrative distance, the author would have had more room to play with them and be like more intentionally funny with them. One of the things about big personality characters like this, why I love to read about them and watch them in shows and stuff, is because you're allowed to poke fun at them, they're allowed to be flawed, but you kind of need that narrative distance to be able to do that kind of work. And so I loved Emily and Wendell's relationship, their dynamic. I liked Emily being very abrasive and kind of learning to accept help from others, to learning to rely and trust people. It was very much supposed to be a story of her growth. But again, I just can't help but thinking that this book would have been so much better if it was in third person. Obviously, that's not what the author intended. That's very purposely wrote this as journal entries for a reason. You know, like, it's not good advice to say this shouldn't have been written this way. It should have been written a different way. That was my biggest takeaway. It was very frustrating to read this in a first-person narration, and I think I would have loved the characters even more and been rooting for them more if the narration was at a distance and it was allowed to make fun of the characters more and like be just mean to their flaws and stuff. And so I'm working on Kamisama Kiss, but the other thing I'm working on is Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. So I'm at page 633 of about 837 pages, so I still got like 250 pages left of this novel. I guess more around 200, but this is a chunker. This is the final book in the first trilogy of the Assassin's Quest trilogy, and it's like so much has happened in this book, but like I feel like so much more needs to happen to be like a conclusion to certain aspects, I guess. I don't know. But if you don't know, this is like a medieval inspired fantasy story, and this book in particular focuses on Fitz and his story growing up from an adolescent into basically a young man. I believe at the end of this book he is like supposed to be 20 or early 20s, not older than 25, I would say, more on like the 20 to 22 range. But it's basically about Fitz, and he is the bastard son of who was originally the heir to the throne and is no longer. He's grown up in court, kind of in a very unstable place because of his birth, but also like he isn't really allowed to leave because of his birth, and he has been secretly being trained as an assassin for the current king. And from there a whole bunch of stuff happens. There's a lot going on in this series, but I love this story and I like how Robin Hobb tells it. Fitz can be a very frustrating character, but I think it's very intentional what Robin Hobb is doing. And yeah, I like this series. Again, I'm not done yet, so I need to finish it, but I really like Robin Hobb's writing and I really like her stories, so that's what I need to finish up this month. But yes, I'm finally back in the swing of reading. Read a lot this month, a lot of good stuff, and yeah, I'm finishing up like an 800-page novel, so I'm doing good. But yes, those are all the books that I read this month, but thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later.